Well, happy Epiphany. We have this day on our calendar, Epiphany. And after all the holidays people have gotten through, it maybe isn't a surprise that we don't make too big a deal out of this particular one. Been through a lot of holidaying already, especially since we tend to start with Thanksgiving and go all the way through. Epiphany can kind of get lost in the shuffle. There are countries where they make a much bigger deal out of it, but we're not one of them. But we do have it as part of our church calendar. I don't know how long that's been going on. And I want to say a little something about it. It occurred to me that the lack of emphasis we place on Epiphany can be judged by the fact that we moved it this year. Most places, most churches will celebrate it next week on the 9th, but we're having baptism that day, so we just pushed it back a little. And I'm not sure that nobody complained. You can imagine if you push back Christmas to the 18th, we hear about that. So what is it? Well, if you've heard anything about Epiphany, you might have heard about the three kings coming to visit Jesus. The baby Jesus in the stable, they're up there on the kind of off to the right. How they came to see Jesus, bringing gifts. There are places where the big day for presents is actually Epiphany, which is actually the 6th of January, 12 days after Christmas, the 12 days of Christmas and all that. And in places you give presents all the way from Christmas through to January 6th. But the funny thing about it is, these three kings that we talk about don't actually show up in the Bible. What the Bible tells us is that there were three wise men. It doesn't even say three, actually. It says there was some unspecified number of wise men who came from the east. And it does mention they had three gifts. So that got turned into three wise men. That got turned into three kings. That got turned into this whole story. They have names. If anybody knows the names of the three kings, I'll be impressed. Uh-oh. Yeah, 2 out of 3. Well, I can't either. Because they were made up hundreds of years after the fact. They're just not in the Bible at all. But here's the thing. It's kind of interesting. They're one of those traditions that developed over time. There's actually a church in Germany that thought they had the bodies of the three kings for hundreds of years. And in the 60s, they went through and confirmed that there were actually 4 people who had died about 800 years after Jesus. So they took down their sign that said, these are the three kings, and put up a sign saying, this is a place where people have come to honor the three kings for many hundreds of years. All of this, again, not in the Bible. So what do we do with it? Do we just forget about it? Well, the answer is no. Because the story of the three kings, the way it's been kind of built up over the years, it's not in the Bible really at all. But it teaches some things that are in the Bible in ways that are a little more accessible. And that's why you didn't hear the story of the wise men from the east. Because the three kings don't look much like those wise men from the east that came to visit Jesus in the house. It specifically says that the wise men came to visit Mary in a house. Probably after the shepherds were long gone. Another little thing you've thrown in there. But it does connect to this reading we heard at the beginning of John. Now, if you're familiar with the Gospels, there are 4 of them. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell very similar stories. We're pretty sure that they're in some way all based on each other. That there was one written first and others that were kind of expanded on. John is completely different. And instead of beginning with baby Jesus or any of that, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all these phrases and comparisons and little word tricks are really kind of hard to get into. But what the story of the three kings tells us is exactly what John was trying to tell us there, which is very simply that Jesus came for the whole world. The three kings, if you ever see them, traditionally, they're wearing funny clothes, right? Maybe turbans or weird things. And you might notice, and I'm not going to turn around and look at the nativity set closely, one of them is usually depicted as being black. Even from way back, 1,000 years ago, they'd show one of the wise men as being black. And the reason is because what the three kings turned into were three people who came from the very farthest parts of the world. And back then, they knew about three parts of the world. They knew about Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so they drew one from Europe, one from Asia, one from Africa, coming from what they thought was as far away as they could to Jerusalem, which back then they thought was the middle of the world, to worship Jesus. It's a symbol, a story about people coming from everywhere, as far away as possible, to the light, that star, at the center. And it's saying Jesus didn't come for just his people, didn't come for just his time and place. Jesus came for everybody. Every person in the whole world, near and far. Jesus is the light for all people. He gave that commission. The three wise men show up at the beginning of Matthew and at the end of Matthew. Jesus says, go out and baptize all nations. Everybody. And one of the most amazing things about the Christians in those early years is that when you had to walk or get on a sailboat to get somewhere, they traveled thousands of miles. Within just a couple generations, there were Christians in India and Spain and Britain and Africa. They traveled. They got the message out. They really worked to make disciples of all nations. It was another thing that impressed people about Christianity, that wherever you went in the world, even when Christianity was persecuted, and there were only just a few Christians in any place, there were few Christians in every place. And wherever they were, they knew that they were tied to each other. That a Christian in Spain who somehow ended up in India would know that he or she was among brothers and sisters, and vice versa. That Christians had founded the church was beyond any nation or place or time. And that's what the three kings are trying to tell us, that all around the world, and even today this is still true, all around the world, people, each in their own way and their own language, and with their own traditions and customs, all come together around that one light that we all share. And so the Three Kings is a story reminding us that right now, there are people who, as far as the world can tell, are absolutely nothing like us, who have nothing in common with us, who we are bound to through Jesus. There are people all over who are our brothers and sisters. And part of our job, our calling, our mission is to remember that and lift that up. And remember that Jesus comes for all people. That the way we think of Jesus isn't the only way. And that whether we have an Asian Jesus or an African Jesus or even a redneck Jesus, that there's that Jesus is for all of us. Beyond that, though, there's even one more lesson. Jesus is not simply for all of us in the abstract. Jesus didn't come for people in general. Jesus came for each person. Jesus came into the world not to be out there where everybody could see him, but to be here. That's why, we can all come to Jesus in the way that we're meant to come to Jesus, in the way that we can know him. That's why we can each accept Jesus. When we say that I accept Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior, some people say, well, what about all the other people? Well, the reason we say that is because Jesus has time for everybody. Jesus has time for me, for them. Most importantly, Jesus has time for you. And so today as we celebrate Epiphany, and as we come to this day, and as we remember what Jesus did, as we prepare to celebrate the baptism of two more people who want to claim what Jesus has done for them, I invite each of us to renew that understanding, that commitment to follow Jesus. Not as a New Year's resolution, which usually lasts about 6 weeks, but as a commitment for today, which maybe can be renewed tomorrow. And as we go forward into this new year, this new time, I hope that each of us will be able to know even more that Jesus is here for all, and Jesus has come for you. So please stand and let's sing together the invitation song.
Jesus, blessed Redeemer.